And now, Move the Sticks with Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks.
What's up, everybody? DJ Bucky here, Move the Sticks, and a special conversation for today's episode. Buck, I feel like we've been able to get some coaches we're interested in talking to each and every week on the show. Really highlighted last week by Urban Meyer. If you've missed that interview, you want to go back and check that out. It was outstanding. But we've got another good one today.
Yeah, great one today. James Franklin, the head coach of Penn State, joins the program. And DJ, you and I have talked offline about how important it is to not only talk to coaches who have orchestrated turnarounds, but guys who have proven formulas for orchestrating turnarounds at multiple programs. Well, James Franklin has done that. He did it at Vanderbilt. He has since done it at Penn State. And to have Penn State consistently competing not only for the Big Ten title, but being in the conversation to be in the playoff four, that is what you want to see. So I'm excited to talk to him about the things that he has done to create the culture at Penn State.
Yeah, it's a culture really based off toughness, and I can't wait to talk to him about how they're able to cultivate that. One of the questions we always are intrigued by is tough guys. Do you find them, or do you build them? Do they exist out there? You got to go locate them, or do you have to be trained up and ingrain that toughness on them once they get on campus? So those are conversations looking forward to having with Coach Franklin and Buck. It's always interesting when you get to talk to a coach coming off of a loss. Now, this team had been rolling, was in the top 4 in the country. Tough loss last week in Minnesota. So also looking forward to chatting with him of how you refocus a team, get them right back on that bike and get up and go.
Yeah, it would be interesting to talk to him, because when we talk to these coaches, we not only will talk about the good times, but how do you get your team to respond in bad times? How do you kind of pick them up off the mat? How do you get them to take on the resiliency that the head coach has? So we'll be able to ask James Franklin those questions and a couple more.
Well, let's stop. We'll stop telling you what we're going to ask him, and let's just do it. Here's our conversation with the head coach, Penn State University, James Franklin. All right, Coach, appreciate your time today. The first question from me, you guys have built such a strong culture there. A lot of times you have a tough team like this, adversity kind of brings out that toughness. You guys have your first loss of the season last week. What have you seen from your team this week in response?
Well, we'll find out more today. The way we do it here, we have a light practice on Sunday, make corrections, do basically a walk and talk scouting report on our next opponent on the field. And then we're off on Mondays and then practice Tuesdays. I thought in the locker room it was the correct response. Obviously, there was a lot of raw emotion. Guys were hurting. And then our guys are on their own on Monday while we come in and game plan and do those types of things. So today will be a really good idea, but from my conversations with the guys, I think we're in a good place. We'll use this. You have a choice. And in my mind, everything is used for fuel. When you win a game, that's used for fuel from a confidence perspective. When you lose a game, you can use that as fuel to make sure that you do everything in your power that you never feel that way again.
Coach, as a coach, you are responsible for setting the vision of the program. And so you talk about going through those high moments and those lows. How are you able to keep your team on a consistent plane so they can sustain it week to week over a 12, 13, 14-week season?
Well, for us, that's where we really try to do the 1-0 mantra. And we don't just talk it. We try to live it in everything we do. I've worked around a lot of coaches where they say that, we're going to do the 1-0 deal, but then they get up in front of the team and you can tell that this game is more important than another game. And, that may be going to class, that may be the weight room. It's all of it's winning the moment, it's being present, and those types of things. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. Obviously, since I got here, you think about where the program was right before I got the job to where it is now. We've made significant strides. Obviously, hard to have this conversation after just having our first loss of the season. But I've been impressed with it. But we try to live it. We try to be consistent with our behaviors and our habits and our approach. And so far, we've done a pretty good job of that.
Coach, you mentioned where this program was when you got there. I want to go back to that time when you took the job and your first meeting in front of the team. When you got a chance to deliver that first message, I'm anxious to hear what that message was and how it was received.
Well, you're talking about one of the more challenging times in maybe college football history. You're talking about, if you look back, if you count interim head coaches, there was the same head coach here for like 80 years. And then I was the fifth head coach in 27 months, if you count the interim. So, obviously, I think one of the most important messages was me that I wanted to be here, and had plans to be here. And that I was invested in them and invested in the program. But there was a lot for me to learn. All these universities and all these programs are very sophisticated and complicated, and you have to be careful, because if you think you can just bring the model from program X and just plug it into program Z, it doesn't look like that. There's lessons that can be learned, but you better understand what you're working with. So I think one of the most important things you can do is having some really good conversations with the players, and then also finding out who are the people that have unbelievable institutional knowledge and community knowledge that are going to get you caught up to speed as quick as you possibly can. So for me, it was basically speaking from the heart and telling them how excited I was about being here and how we were going to build this thing together. But there was a wall put up at that point because, again, I was the fifth head coach in 27 months to stand up in front of them and sell them on a vision and sell them on a plan. So it was going to take some time to knock that wall down and build that trust back up, not really in me, but in whoever was sitting in this position.
Coach, what was interesting about what you just said, you said you can't necessarily take one model from one school and drop it in the other school. How do you know what things are able to be carried over, and how do you know where you need to kind of create not new traditions, but you need to do new things that are very specific to the school where you're at, like a Penn State?
Well, to me, that's where like your core values, that's where they are critical. That's where, your mission statement is critical. That's where your overall philosophy is critical. So like for me, it sounds very simplistic, but my philosophy is everything starts and ends with relationships. So, every decision you make within that organization and that building, it better be something that builds and strengthens relationships between individuals, but also within the team. That's holding people accountable. That's all those types of things. So my point is those big picture common themes that are critical in any organization, in any environment, those don't change. But your point is a good one. Understanding what that university is like, what things do carry over from a Vanderbilt that makes sense at a place like Penn State and what don't. Me going to Vanderbilt and walking around the Union and try to convince students to not go home for Thanksgiving break and to stay for the Tennessee game, I don't need to do that at Penn State.
A little different.
A little different model from that perspective. And, it did take some adjustment because less of that was needed. But I just think being able to identify those things, here's the critical things that are never going to change, your core values, your core beliefs. And then all these other things, it's got to be built, no different than the offense. It's got to be built to the personnel you have, no different than the defense, no different than your recruiting philosophy. The recruiting philosophy at Penn State is very different than the recruiting philosophy at Vanderbilt. And I think that one of the distinctions that a lot of people probably wouldn't think about is we're going to recruit probably more national at Vanderbilt than we are at Penn State. And people say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Well, number one, because of the academic requirements, you had to go broader. But the other thing is we had an international airport there, so you could get anywhere. Where at Penn State, this isn't I don't know if you guys have been here. This isn't an easy place to get to.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not only getting recruits here, it's also being able to get our staff out efficiently. So all those things kind of factor into it, and that's why your plan has to be very specific to the university and the program. I'll make one more point on that. I think one of the big mistakes that sometimes ADs or presidents or search firms make is they go hire the sexy hire from the sexy school. Mm-hmm. Well, that's fine if it's sexy school to sexy school, but if you go hire a guy from a program that's in the top 5, that's always been in the top 5, that have every resource necessary, and now he's got to go take over a job at a place that doesn't have the resources, and you got to find ways to make things work through creativity, whatever it may be. A lot of those guys are going to get frustrated because they're like, what do you mean we don't have this? Or what do you mean we don't have that? So, finding those guys that are going to find ways to solve problems and be creative and come up with solutions rather than always the guy that's had every reason to be successful his whole career.
Yeah, the head coach is sitting there going, wait, I have to go pick up the recruit at the airport? Where's our staff to get that done? A little different there. Coach, the Penn State football program, I mentioned a little bit, just toughness. And you play in a conference where, I think we've seen the speed with the top teams in the conference go to another level over the last decade. But still, there's a toughness element you have to win in the Big Ten. So when you're building your roster, you're going out and recruiting kids. I'm always fascinated by whether you believe you have to go find tough kids or whether it's the program's responsibility to build toughness into them once they get there.
Yeah, I think you better go find toughness. I think coaches are always trying to develop it, and you always will. I would also make the argument it's harder to develop toughness now, probably more than ever. This probably isn't a very popular thing to say right now, but I'm going to say it anyway. This generation gets more and does less than any time in the history of football. And I know that's the complete opposite of the conversation that's going on right now, but it is. I mean, even when I played Division II ball, I don't know if it was necessarily legal, but we did it. We did 3-a-days the entire camp, and I'm not exaggerating. We practiced in the morning, we practiced in the afternoon, and then we had a special teams and conditioning practice at night, the entire camp. And now we can't even do 2-a-days. And I'm not, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying that these decisions are wrong, but when you think that you're going to be able to develop toughness now in a kid that doesn't have it with the limited amount of time that we get with them in practices, it's very difficult to do. Do I think you can develop it to a degree? Yes. But you better go find it. You better go find speed on the front end. You better go find toughness on the front end. You can coach the fundamentals and techniques.
Coach, I'm a first.
Coach, real quick here, Buck. Just real quick. I just wanted you to touch on that. You say you can improve it a little bit. Like how? Just give me an example of at your program how you do try and grow that culture of toughness there once they get to campus.
Well, it's funny because so forever, everybody, you guys did it. You do the morning workouts where in the off season you do the morning workouts. You bring them in at 5:00 in the morning. It's not a whole lot about development techniques. It's about building mental and physical toughness. It's about going through that shared adversity to bring the team together. And guys have been doing it forever. Well, now there's a lot of this generation, they don't necessarily always understand, why are we doing something that doesn't correlate directly to fundamentals and technique or speed or strength? They don't seem to understand or value that bringing the team together and that adversity that you have to go through and that mental and that physical toughness that you're trying to develop. And then you also have the sports scientists that are saying, well, why are you waking them up at 5:00 in the morning? Sleep is critical to their development. So there's just so many different voices and perspectives and angles that are coming. So it's how do you balance that? How do you take some of the information that's out there and some of the technology that's out there and some of the science that's out there to make the best decisions for your program without losing that toughness and that grittiness that you also need in our game?
All right, Coach, I'm going to hit you with this because I'm a first-time head coach, just finishing my first season as a high school head coach. I think you would like the fact that we use "we are" for our high school mantra. But if I had to ask you one question, I want to ask you about culture. Building it and maintaining it. You've done it at two different places. How do you build it and how do you maintain it once you begin to have success?
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the things that I think, first of all, that we all better be careful of, whether it's culture whether it's standard, whether it's a cloud corner. We have a tendency as coaches and leaders to throw these terms around, but we've never truly been able to articulate or define what that word means in our program. I mean, how many times you've gone through a whole season, the end of the season, a ninth grader or a freshman goes, Coach, you've been saying cloud corner all year long. What the heck's a cloud corner? You just assume they know. And I think it's the same way. Everybody throws culture out. You read books, you go listen to speakers, you hear coaches, and they use the word culture 35 times in their presentation. But have you ever really defined it? Do the players know what you're talking about? So I think one of the things you have to do is whatever you're talking about in your program, whether they're core values or whether they're your overall philosophy, you can't assume that people know what those things are. For me, it's making sure that the players understand, number one, that you care. It's got to start with relationships, building that trust and the relationships with the players, because I believe once you have that, you have the ability to take the program and the kids to a level that they're probably not able to do on their own. Why? Because you can be really challenging and demanding on people if they know it's coming from a place where you're doing this because you care about them and you care about the program. And when you have that trust and you have that respect and those types of relationships, then you can really do some significant things, not only as a team, but also individually. So it starts with that. It starts with trust. The thing I would also tell you is it's amazing what you can get done within your locker room with identifying some weaknesses, maybe things that have been there for a long time, and getting them fixed. So like, for example, when I got to Vanderbilt, the locker room was in bad shape. Well, that locker room had been in bad shape for a long time, and the administration supported me to get it fixed fast. So now they saw a guy who had a plan, a very clear plan. He had a vision, and I was fighting for them to get things done, and they saw it happening. So it gave me instant credibility with them. I'd also make the argument, it's amazing what you can get done with a hat and a T-shirt. And what I mean by that is as a high school coach, you're talking about, it's the first time, I would set up 10 meetings with influential people in that community, the superintendent, the principal, the mayor, whoever it may be, and you invite them to lunch, and they're going to be sitting there waiting for you to ask them for something. And you don't ask for anything. Mm-hmm. And you give them a hat and a T-shirt, and you ask, what do you know about this community now that you wish you knew when you first got here? Give me that information. And you don't ask them for anything. You give them a T-shirt. Wow. At the end of the meeting. You say to them, hey, if there's ever anything you need from me or our program, don't hesitate to reach out. And those guys leave that meeting and they say, hey, this guy really cares about the kids. This guy really cares about the community. And now when you do need something down the road and you call, they're more willing to help you because they know where your heart is and how you're invested. So you got to create that culture and that buy-in in the locker room, but then you also better do it in the community, because when you can get some of those yeses when you really need them, they're going to be valuable.
That's great advice.
That is outstanding. Coach, we've got a sheet full of notes here, just a couple more things. When you look at, talk to Coach Scott Skyerfield, who coached me at App State. He said one of the big keys for him when he took over there was open the door to the head coach's office. You have players come in. You've talked about building relationships. How do you go about doing that one-on-one with the kids?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I got so much respect for Coach. We played him here at Penn State last year, and we were lucky to get out of there, man. They played great against us, and he's doing a great job at Louisville as well, obviously. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think everybody uses the open door, philosophy, and I think that's great. I always try to maybe take some other approaches that maybe aren't as common or as cliche. And I don't mean that the wrong way. I don't want Coach to misinterpret what I'm saying. But everybody says open door. So, what I try to do is I try to identify a certain amount of guys every offseason, and I take them out to dinner. And we do the Thursday night dinners at my house, which a lot of coaches do, where you have a position group over the house for dinner. And that's really good. But I also think spending one-on-one time, like you mentioned, is really important. So what I did is I identify a certain number of guys each offseason. I go out to dinner with them one-on-one, talk to them, ask them how their family's doing, ask them how school's going, what are the issues, what are the problems, what are the challenges, what do you like about the program, what don't you like about the program. If you were the head coach, what would you change? And just sit there and talk, you know, and you know, the only bad part, again, is this is State College, so I ended up going to the same burger joint like 37 times in a row. Not a whole lot of when it comes to food options. But I think that more than anything, it's not just the information you gain, but it's just taking a moment with that kid to show them one-on-one that you care and that you listen. And those things go a long ways. You know, they really do. And the other thing that's always interesting as the head coach is I miss being with a position, because the position, you got to know those guys on a very significant level, because you spend 2 hours a day with them, and same guys over to your house every Thursday night. You know, my wife's still very close with all the quarterbacks that I coached at Kansas State and Maryland and those places. But as a head coach, you never really get enough time with any of the players to build it on the same level that a position coach would. So you have to work hard at that. You know, but what I will tell you is there's value, because you may not know any one group, but you know the whole team better. And not just know the whole team better. You may know an individual maybe better or differently because you learned things about him from 3 or 4 other conversations you had with other players. So it allows you to put the whole puzzle together. And to me, that's what we're all trying to do. Is the best way that we can make decisions as leaders is by having as much information. And if you're getting information from your staff, you're getting information from the administration, if you're getting information from the community, and now you're also getting information from your players, at the end of the day, you got to make the decision. But the only way you're going to make a great decision is by having all or most of the information, and that's where the relationships are critical.
Coach, I know you've got to run to practice, so last thing, we've asked this to every guy. We've got some great stories. Best high school football player that you've ever seen. Could be somebody you signed, didn't sign, but just best high school football player you've ever seen. We've heard Allen Iverson. We've heard Frank Gore. We've heard an unbelievable list of players, so we want to get your answer on that one.
It's hard for me to say that because I'm going to piss a lot of people off if I don't say them. That's the
I know.
thing.
Everybody's done it. Everybody's done it, Coach. You got to do it, man.
Wow.
You know who got Sammy Watkins got a ton of votes from coaches too.
Really? That's a hard one. It's hard for me not to say Saquon Barkley. You know what I mean?
Say Saquon. Say Saquon. It's okay. You're allowed to say your guy.
You're allowed.
But I don't want to come off like a homer where I'm saying my guy. It's hard to go against that guy. There's a cool picture that I got in my basement with me and Sean Spencer, my D-line coach, who had that recruiting area. And it's a picture taken from a local newspaper, and it's shot over Saquon's shoulder. It's Saquon's back, shot over his shoulder, and me and Sean are standing on the sideline scouting the game. And this was with Saquon. With Saquon, you know, so it's a really cool shot. But yeah, I'm gonna go with my man Saquon.
Nothing wrong with that, Coach. Nothing wrong with that at all.
You're allowed, Coach. You're allowed. Hey, thank you so much, man. Again, we've got pages full of notes that we learned a lot today, and know you've got a busy week ahead. So we can't thank you enough for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Hey, thanks, Coach.
Well, Buck, can't thank Coach Franklin enough for his time today. Literally had his coaching gear on, headed out to the field for practice. So it's great to catch up with him. The big takeaways, I thought the toughness conversation is interesting. You know, do you recruit it? Do you develop it? A lot of times you hear people say, well, you know, it's really 50 of one, 50 of the other. You got to find some toughness, but then we really build it. He made it sound like more like 80-20. I mean, you got to go find tough kids because you're not going to have the same opportunity to train them to make them tough. Yeah,
I think there is something to that. I think inside either you have it or you don't have it. You can kind of bring it to the surface a little more, but ultimately if you're a tough, resilient person, like that is in you. You can kind of show them the way and give them the tools, but if it's not deep down in them, I think players have a tough time kind of exhibiting those traits on the field. I think the thing that he talked about that was really interesting was hiring guys who understand where they're going, meaning sexy hire to sexy school. But what about when that same coach doesn't have all the resources? Is he resilient? Is he resourceful enough to be able to work around it? Obviously, with James Franklin, he came from a situation where he didn't have all the resources. So now you give him more resources. He is able to kind of take a program and take it to a higher level because he has more access to other things. And so I do believe it was great advice to those who are in the hiring cycle, who are hiring coaches. Know what your coach is used to, what he's accustomed to, and make sure that you're bringing him to a place that either matches that, or you may need to look to somebody who is comfortable kind of working a little harder to kind of do more with less. I think that is great advice for him.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'll finish with here, I thought when he talked about getting to know the staff, the players, and the community, take the time to learn your environment that you're going into before you come and blast them with all the plans and all these great ideas that you've generated, across the country where you maybe worked previously. Get in there and find out what the needs are, what they like, what they don't like, what they have, what they don't have. And then you can craft your plan and present your plan. I think just coming in there, knocking them over with your plan before you figure out the lay of the land is a mistake. I think that's great advice, not just in the coaching world, but even outside that world. You take a new job, take a little bit of time to learn your new surroundings.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to understand what you're stepping into. Every school, every situation had its own culture. You need to make sure you kind of ingratiate yourself to the culture, understand what the culture is before you begin to make these radical changes.
Absolutely. Well, it was a fun conversation there with Coach James Franklin. We continue to have these conversations on a weekly basis. Hope you guys enjoy them as much as we do. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Move the Sticks. We'll catch you next time.